The snow was falling in thick, soundless sheets, blotting out the horizon until the world itself seemed buried. She stumbled through it, the hem of her gown dragging in the drifts, her breath tearing ragged from her lungs. A faint ring of church bells echoed behind her, each toe striking like a jeer at her cowardice. The veil had long since been torn from her head. The lace snagged on a thorn when she fled the chapel steps. What clung to her now was not the silk she had once imagined as a crown of honor, but a tattered shroud heavy with frost. Her fingers were raw and stiff from gripping her skirts, and her boots, not meant for storms, sank ankle-deep at every step. She pressed forward, blind to direction, driven only by the instinct to leave behind a man whose voice still rang in her ears, low and sharp, promising a life of command, not companionship. The cruel edge of his words had sliced deeper than any blade. She had thought herself hardened to whispers and judgment, but the moment his hand gripped her arm before the altar, she had felt the truth. If she stayed, she would vanish into a silence worse than death. The town would call it shame, the kind that clings to a woman like a curse. They would say she was ungrateful, foolish, mad to run from a husband chosen for her. Yet no one in the chapel had seen the bruises blooming beneath her sleeves, the way his eyes cut to her like a brand marking flesh. No one had cared to ask why her lips trembled when she vowed obedience. They saw a match of advantage, and that was enough. She had seen a cage closing, and it was more than she could bear. Her lungs burned as the wind pressed against her face. Snow clung to her lashes until each blink came heavy and blurred. She thought of turning back, but the image of him waiting, smug and furious, drove her deeper into the white wilderness. The prairie stretched endless, but even the prairie ended, and soon she reached the shadow of the mountains. Pines loomed like solemn sentinels, their dark shapes weighed with snow. She did not know how far she had come, nor how many hours had passed since her flight began. Her body shook with exhaustion, her gown stiff with ice, her skin burning from the cold's relentless bite. Somewhere within her a voice whispered she would die here, and perhaps it would be a kind fate, better the snow's embrace than his hands. She fell once, then again, knees buckling into the drift, her palms pressed into the frozen crust, but she had little strength left to rise. Around her, the hush of falling snow deepened, swallowing all sound save the ragged rasp of her own breath. She thought of her mother's hands once braiding her hair, of a dream of a home where laughter lived, and the ache of knowing she had never reached such a place. The storm blurred her sight until she could not tell earth from sky. She pushed forward once more, half crawling, half stumbling, before at last she collapsed near the edge of a clearing. Her body gave in, numbness replacing fear. She lay there, cheek pressed to the snow, tears freezing against her skin. Her last thought was that perhaps she had been foolish to flee. Perhaps shame was heavier than chains. Then the world dimmed, and she surrendered to the silence. When she opened her eyes, it was not the cold sky above her, but the vague outline of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his form draped in furs that caught the falling flakes. He stood at the tree line, as though carved from a mountain itself, dark against the white wilderness. For a moment she wondered if he were a spirit, a figment summoned by her mind in its final hour. His stillness was uncanny, his silence deeper than the snow. He did not move toward her at first, only watched, his breath a pale cloud in the air. Then, with a deliberate slowness, he stepped closer, each crunch of snow steady and certain. She tried to speak, but her lips were numb. Her body would not rise. Fear twisted briefly in her. Fear that he might return her the man she had fled, that he might see only a fallen woman to be discarded back into shame. But when he reached her, he did not ask. He stooped, arms strong and unhesitant, and lifted her as though she weighed no more than the snow itself. The fur at his shoulder was warm against her frozen cheek. She caught the scent of smoke and pine upon him, something earthy, untamed, yet clean. His face was partly shadowed beneath a fur-lined hood, but she glimpsed a jaw marked by hard lines, eyes the color of the storm-dark forest. They held neither pity nor judgment, only a calm depth, like a lake hidden in the mountains. He carried her across the clearing, his stride even, unhurried. She heard no words from him, only the sound of snow shifting beneath his boots, the faint rattle of gear at his belt. The silence was not cruel. It was steady, grounding. Each step pulled her further from the echo of church bells and whispered scorn. Her eyelids sank heavier with each moment. Somewhere in the blur of exhaustion, she wondered what manner of man lived alone in the high country, far from the reach of the town. A hermit? A trapper? A wanderer? She did not know, nor did she care, for warmth was already seeping into her limbs where his arms enclosed her. She had run from cruelty and found something unexpected, a refuge carved in silence. As darkness pressed at the edges of her vision once more, she clung faintly to the rhythm of his steps. He said nothing, yet the act itself spoke, a vow unspoken, a promise carried in the steadiness of his hold. No one in town had lifted a hand to stop her pain. No one had seen her worth. Yet here in the wilderness, in the arms of a man she had never known, she felt, for the first time, that perhaps she was not forsaken. Snowflakes melted against her face as her head sank against his chest. His heart beat steady beneath the firs, a low drum against the silence of the storm. The last thing she knew before sleep claimed her was not despair, but the quiet certainty of his strength. And though she could not yet understand what path awaited, she knew this. The world had not ended in shame. It had begun again, carried through the snow by a stranger who did not ask for her past, only bore her forward. The first sound she knew upon waking was a steady pop of wood giving way to flame. It echoed through the room in a slow, comforting rhythm, as if the fire itself breathed. She lay wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, its fibers scratchy but warm, and for a long moment she did not move. The scent of smoke clung to the air, mingled with pine resin, and the faint tang of damp leather drying near the hearth. Her body, once frozen stiff, now ached with a dull throb of returning blood. The cabin was dim, lit by the orange glow of the fire. Shadows stretched along the rough-hewn walls, marked with notches and scars from years of use. Hooks bore coats and gear, and in the corner she saw snowshoes leaned against the logs. The roof groaned under the weight of the storm, but the walls held firm. She was inside the world of another, a stranger, yet safe for the moment. Across the room, he stood, the mountain man. His back was broad beneath a hide coat, his shoulders square as he bent to stoke the flames. Sparks leapt upward as he pressed another log into place. The light caught the hard planes of his face when he turned slightly, rough skin weathered by sun and snow, a beard shadowing his jaw, eyes that glimmered with something unreadable. He glanced at her once, brief but steady, as though measuring whether she had strength enough to rise. She shifted beneath the blanket, clutching it tighter around her. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry. He said nothing at first, only moved to the table where a pot simmered. From it, he poured broth into a wooden bowl, set on a low stool near her palate, and slid it within reach. The steam rose in curls, carrying the scent of herbs and meat. Her hand trembled as she reached. The bowl was warm against her fingers, and she sipped slowly. The broth slipped down her throat, easing the rawness there. He did not watch her drink, but busied himself with the fire again, as though her survival were task enough, not cause for comment. "You brought me here," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He gave a slow nod. His voice, when it came, was deep and quiet, worn with years of solitude. "Found you near the pines." No more than that. No demand for explanation, no accusation of disgrace. The words were simple as stone, carrying no weight beyond the fact itself. She lowered her gaze, shame pressing against her chest. If he knew who she was, what she had done, what the town must already be saying, then surely he would send her back. Yet he made no move to do so. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of fire. She ate until the bowl was empty, her hand steady with each sip. He took the dish without a word, set it aside, and moved the window shutter. Snow pressed thick against the glass. He lifted the bar to check the storm, then closed it again, the cabin once more sealed in its hush. "You should rest," he said, voice low but firm. Her body longed for it, but her mind would not surrender so easily. "Do you know," she asked, eyes on the fire, "what they'll say of me?" He turned, meeting her gaze across the room. His eyes were steady, unreadable as stone cliffs. "What folks say is wind. Passes quick enough." It startled her, the blunt truth of it. No one had ever dismissed gossip with such simplicity. All her life she had been bound by others' tongues. cut by whispers sharper than knives. Here, in his cabin, the words of others seemed to matter less than the storm outside. She lay back, exhaustion overtaking her, though her heart still beat fast from the memory of flight. In the fire's glow she studied him, this man of the high country. He moved with quiet strength, each task deliberate, placing logs, checking his rifle, pulling a pelt across the door for him to keep out the draft. He carried himself as one who answered only to the land, not a town or church or gossip. The hours slipped into night. Shadows deepened, fire crackled low. Sleep pressed heavy against her eyes, but fear stirred still, a shadow of the man she had fled. She imagined him searching, imagined his fury filling the cold night. Her body stiffened, breath quickening. The mountain man noticed. Without a word he rose, crossed the corner, and lifted his rifle. He set it by the door within easy reach, then returned to his chair by the hearth. He leaned back, broad frame filling the space, his gaze fixed on the flames. "No one will hurt you here," he said at last, voice even, final. The words struck deep, heavier than any vow she had known. They were not dressed in flattery or odes, only in the quiet certainty of a man who meant what he spoke. She let the blanket draw closer around her shoulders, her body trembling as the fear ebbed away. For the first time since her flight, her breath steadied. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, she was guarded not by chains of law or judgment, but by the silent promise of a man who owed her nothing, yet gave her safety all the same. Sleep claimed her then, soft and heavy. She did not dream of church bells or cruel hands. She dreamed only of snow falling outside a cabin, endless and quiet, while fire burned steady within. When the storm broke, the land lay softened under a pale sky. Snow clung heavy to the pines, and the mountain air was sharp with the scent of thaw. Days had passed in the cabin's hush, days in which she had learned the rhythm of silence. The man's quiet steps, the steady scrape of knife across wood, the snap of logs when he split them, the hiss of broth simmering. He spoke little, but his gestures carried meaning. When her hands trembled, he set the bowl closer. When her shoulders bent low, he stoked the fire higher. She had begun to understand that safety could exist without words. Yet supplies grew low, and the thaw forced them down to town. She dreaded it. The very thought of the eyes that would follow her, the whispers curling like smoke in every doorway, made her breath shorten. Still, the mountain man saddled his horse, loaded the pack mule, and with quiet nod bade her follow. She pulled her borrowed cloak tighter and obeyed, heart unsteady. The road was rutted with ice, the fields gleaming white under sun. In the distance, town rose small and mean against the land. She felt its weight before they entered, the burden of judgment, of eyes that cut sharper than frost. The first faces turned when they stepped onto the street. Women at the mercantile paused midward, their lips curling into whispers. A ranch hand spat into the snow, smirking as he elbowed another. "Runaway bride," someone muttered. "Shamed woman." The words trailed after her like a noose. Her chest burned with the old shame. She lowered her gaze, fingers tightening on her cloak. Each step into town felt like walking barefoot on shards of glass. The mountain man walked beside her, broad and steady. His eyes did not shift to the whispers, nor his shoulders bow to their stares. He simply moved forward, carrying the list of supplies, each stride a wall against the noise. When one man laughed too loud, a sound sharp of mockery, the mountain man's glance fell on him. It was not anger, not threat, only a silence, so firm the man swallowed his words and turned away. Inside the mercantile, the air was thick with sawdust and suspicion. The keeper eyed her as though she were dirt tracked on the floor. She felt her cheeks burn. But when her hands faltered at a bundle of flour, the mountain man took it from her, laid it on the counter, and counted coins in a steady rhythm. His presence was shield enough, his silence louder than any defense. Still, the shame lingered when they left town. She carried it with her as they rode back through snow-laden pines, her heart heavy with all she could not change. That night, when the fire burned low, she stitched at a tear in her cloak. The thread trembled in her fingers. Each pull was slow, uneven, but it was work she could manage. He watched from his chair, the glow of flame brushing his face. He did not speak, yet she felt the weight of his gaze. For the first time, she did not shrink from it. Instead, She kept her eyes on the stitch, willing her hand steady, knowing it'd seen her effort. The days grew longer, snow loosening its grip. They carried water from the creek, stacked wood, set snares. She found herself learning small things: how to sweep ashes from the hearth, how to mend rope, how to grind coffee beans in the worn mill. None of it was asked of her, yet each task pressed a little dignity back into her hands. Still, the whispers haunted. She dreamed of the church, the faces turned against her, the cruel voice of the man she had fled. At times she feared he would appear on a mountain path, fists clenched, eyes burning with ownership. At times she thought she heard his boots in the snow. But always, she would glance at the rifle set near the door, the quiet figure by the fire, and the fear eased. One evening, she found herself outside at dusk. The air was sharp, the snow crusted with ice that gleamed pink beneath the sinking sun. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney. She pressed her hand to the rough wood of the doorframe and listened. Inside, he moved with that same measured calm, tending the fire. It struck her then how different this life felt from what she had known. Not freedom in grand strokes, but in small breaths, in the absence of cruelty. Yet she knew the world would not forget. The town's whispers had not died. They never would. She was marked, a woman abandoned at the altar, a woman who had run. But the sting of it no longer cut so deep. She had begun to see that whispers were smoke. Thin, choking for a moment, but gone with the wind. What remained was what she chose to hold. That night, as the firelight flickered, she looked across the room at him. He sat in his chair, quiet as always, his eyes on the flames. Between them stretched not silence of strangers, but silence filled with meaning. She did not know what name to give it. All she knew was that she was no longer the woman who had fled with nothing but shame. She was something more now, though fragile still, like a flame trembling in the draught. She lowered her sewing to her lap and breathed steady. For the first time, she let herself wonder, not in fear, but in the faint glimmer of hope, what tomorrow might hold in the high country with him near. The night was still when Clara awoke to the sound of the pines moaning under the weight of the wind. For a moment, she lay frozen, listening to the groan of timbers and the faint pop of embers from a hearth. But beneath those ordinary sounds was something else, the quiet tread of boots on the cabin's porch. She held her breath, pulse racing as the latch rattled. Elias was already up, silent as a shadow. He lifted his rifle from where it leaned against the wall and met her wide eyes with a look that spoke plain. Stay still. Clara obeyed, her hands clutching the wool blanket to her chest, as if it could shield her from whatever waited outside. The door creaked, and Elias yanked it open before the intruder could force his way in. A tall figure stood in the doorway, breath steaming in the cold, hat pulled low. For a heartbeat, Clara thought it might be another wanderer come begging shelter from the storm. But when the man stepped forward and the firelight caught his face, Elias's jaw hardened. "Graham," he said flatly. The name lingered in the air like smoke. Clara had heard it before, whispered when Elias thought she wasn't listening. Graham was no neighbor nor friend. He was a man who had once sworn vengeance after Elias had driven him off these very ridges years ago, when he tried to stake a claim through blood rather than sweat. "Didn't think you'd bury yourself this deep, Elias," Graham sneered, his voice roughened by whiskey and cold. His eyes flicked toward Clara, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "And now you've gone and fetched yourself a bride from the rails. Guess the wilderness don't suit a man without company." Elias kept the rifle steady, though Clara saw the tension in his shoulders. "You've no right here," he said. "Best turn around before the snow buries you where you stand." Graham chuckled, low and mean. "I didn't come for the land this time. I came for what you got hidden away. A cabin, food, and her." Clara flinched, but Elias stepped forward, blocking her from view. His voice dropped, cold in the wind outside. "You won't lay a hand on her." The silence stretched taut, broken only by the fire's hiss. Then Graham's hand moved toward his belt, and the room erupted in motion. Elias fired, the crack echoing to the cabin like thunder. Graham stumbled back, clutching his arm where blood blossomed through his sleeve. He spat a curse but did not retreat. "This ain't finished," Graham growled, staggering into the night. "You can't hide forever." I'll burn this place to the ground before I let you keep it." Elias slammed the door shut, bracing it with a heavy bar. His chest heaved, though his eyes stayed sharp. Clara rose, trembling, and crossed him, her hand brushing his arm. "He'll come back," she whispered. "I know," Elias said, voice grim. "And when he does, we'll be ready." The hours that followed were long and restless. Clara helped Elias gather what supplies they could move quickly at Forced abandoned cabin: dried venison, flour, kindling wrapped tight. Yet even as her hands worked, her heart wavered. She had come west thinking she was unwanted, discarded, a woman with little to offer but labor and quiet obedience. Now, standing beside this mountain man, she felt the weight of choice pressing on her. Could she endure the danger that came with him? Could she stand fast against the kind of men who hunted him through the pines? By dawn, the answer was forming in her chest. The wind had died, leaving the forest eerily hushed. Smoke from the chimney rose in a thin, wavering line, sure to catch a watcher's eye. Elias checked his rifle and strapped on his hunting knife. "Stay close," he told Clara. "If he comes, I'll lead him away from you. Don't argue it." Clara looked him squarely in the eye, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "If he comes, I won't be hiding. This is my home now, too." Something flickered in Elias's expression then. Pride, perhaps, or something deeper he dared not name. He reached out, rough hand brushing her cheek, the gentleness at odds with his weathered face. "You've more grit than most men I've known," he murmured. "But grit alone won't stop a bullet." Before Clara could answer, the smell of smoke drifted on the breeze. Elias stiffened, turning toward the window. Beyond the trees, a faint orange glow wavered. Graham hadn't slunk off nursing his wound. He had set fire to the forest. The flames moved fast, licking up the dry pines, filling the air with sparks and ash. Panic clawed at Clara's throat, but Elias's hand closed firmly around hers. "To the creek," he ordered. "It'll be our line of safety." They fled the cabin as the fire roared closer, heat pressing at their backs. Clara stumbled over roots, her skirts catching on brambles, but Elias hauled her onward with unyielding strength. Behind them, the cabin groaned as fire devoured the timbers, collapsing into a storm of sparks. At the creek's edge they turned. Across the flames, through the smoke, Graham appeared, wild-eyed and grinning, pistol raised. The world seemed to slow. The hiss of fire, the pounding of Clara's heart, the gleam of steel in his hand. Elias shoved Clara behind him, leveling his rifle in one swift, fluid motion. The shots rang out almost together. Graham staggered, then crumpled to the earth, his pistol tumbling from his grasp. The fire raged on, consuming trees and home alike. But in that moment the world narrowed to the two of them standing at the water's edge, breathless, alive. Elias lowered the rifle, shoulders sagging with both relief and sorrow. The cabin he had built, the years of solitude, it was all ash now. Clara slipped her hand into his, her grip steady despite the smoke stinging her eyes. "You still have me," she said softly. "If you'll have me." Elias turned to her, the lines of his face etched with weariness, but his gaze steady. "A man can lose his walls and his roof," he said. "But if he still has someone willing to stand in the fire beside him, then he's rich beyond measure." The flames roared on, but Clara heard only the promise in his words, a vow not spoken lightly. The pines bore witness, their blackened trunks rising like sentinels around them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And though ash rained down upon them, Clara felt something fierce ignite within her, hope unyielding and bright.